The trial of Andrei Yermak is the top topic in Ukraine today. And this trial is truly shocking because what came out at the session of the High Anti-Corruption Court on May 13 is, not just a corruption scandal anymore. This is some kind of political drama with fortune tellers, shamans, Nord Stream 2, staff appointments based on horoscopes, and money from a laundering scheme. And we're talking about millions. But what's interesting is that suddenly details emerged about how Andrei Yermak not only consulted with some fortune teller, but also, following her advice, tried to derail efforts to block the revival of the Russian Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. So let's sort this out step by step. I'm Alexei Pechi, let's discuss this together. But before we start, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. It's very important. It really helps promote the content on YouTube, and I will be grateful to you for that. And also subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechi News, the link to it is in the description of this video. So, let's start with the session of the High Anti-Corruption Court of Ukraine. This is already the second day, and it still has not produced a decision on the preventive measure for Yermak. Today, the HACC continued to consider the preventive measure for the former head of the president's office. And here's what happened. Valentina Grebenyuk from the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office announced this in the courtroom. The prosecution reported that the suspect consulted a fortune teller regarding the leadership of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, as well as Ukrainian journalists and members of parliament. The materials that were read out even mention the name of the American president, Donald Trump. The investigation seized an iPhone 12 which belonged to a certain Veronika and now we'll figure out who that is. This is the same Veronika Fengshui office. That's exactly how the prosecution identified her. And that's how she was saved in Andrei Yermak's phone as Veronika Fengshui office. And so, the seized phone was used by Anikievich exclusively to communicate with the contact Andrei 2025, that was Andrei Yermak. Now, what exactly was he asking her about? According to the case materials read out by the prosecutor, Yermak turned to the clairvoyant. Regarding the director of NABU, Semen Krivonos, the head of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, Alexander Klimenko, the chief editor of Ukrainska Pravda, Sevgil Museva, investigative journalist Mikhailo Tkach, and members of parliament Yaroslav Zhelezniak, Oleksiy Honcharenko, and David Arakamia. And this is not even the full list of those about whom he turned to the clairvoyant. Donald Trump's name is also mentioned in the courtroom, and about all of them, Yermak asked the clairvoyant for advice on what he should do with them. So, the person who was de facto managing Ukraine's foreign policy and coordinating this policy with the White House was consulting on all these issues with a Kiev astrologer. The prosecutor read out the correspondence between Veronika Fengshui and Andrei 2025. December 24, 2025. That was when the first searches were conducted at Yermak's place. And then the contact Andrei 2025 wrote, quote, Klimenko Krivonos. The fortune teller replied with a long multi-page message that begins like this. I'm quoting verbatim. I'm very angry today, so I apologize in advance for being blunt. But on the other hand, maybe my bluntness will put you on a different wavelength. Everything begins with the words we say to ourselves and to others. For the past few months, you haven't been escalating things and you also haven't responded to any attacks or beatings. They're the ones escalating and you allow it to happen. There's no escalation on your part here at all. This is the correspondence of a person who, mind you, was running the country with a Kiev astrologer about how he should respond to anti-corruption investigations. And I'm not making this up. These are materials from the pretrial investigation, announced today in the High Anti-Corruption Court. Now, who is Veronika Fengshui? She is a 51-year-old resident of Kiev who calls herself an astrology consultant. Her real name is Veronika Anikievich. On social media, she actively supported Andrei Yermak. In other users' contacts, she is listed as Veronika Consultant AB, that is, Andrei Borisovich. Attention! Veronika Anikievich is Yermak's fortune teller. On Telegram, she runs the channel Lunar Hours and gives astrology consultations about how to find your path, but that's not all. In 2015, that same Anikievich calmly traveled to Crimea. Her father, Fedor Anikievich, is a citizen of the Russian Federation, the former head of the district branch of the opposition bloc in Genichensk, who in 2015 stated that he respects Russia. Judging by his photos from social media, they say that he, like other employees, posed with St. George ribbons and Russian flags in May 2025, and he lives in occupied Genichensk. The fortune teller refused to comment on this situation and simply hung up the phone. Personnel appointments in the Ukrainian state were coordinated with a woman whose father is a collaborator living in the occupied territory. Now, regarding Nord Stream 2, I think this intrigued you. This is a whole different level. So today, Andriy Kobolev, the former head of the board of Naftogaz, shocked everyone with a confession. Quote, "When in 2021, shortly before I was dismissed, Yermak tried to convince me to stop cooperating with our lobbyists in the US. He actively used the phrase, 'This is not Fengshui.' What is this about?" Since 2017, Naftogaz has been actively working with the US Congress and administration, pushing for sanctions against Nord Stream 2 and preventing its launch. And then in 2021, a year before the full-scale invasion, the head of the president's office, Yermak, convinced the head of Naftogaz to stop this work with Congress and the administration, as well as with lobbyists, and not to push for sanctions. And even more so, not to push to keep Nord Stream 2 from ever being launched. He says that fighting against the launch of the Russian gas pipeline is not feng shui. I don't know for sure, but it seems like this is a reference to that very Veronika Fengshui. Now, regarding the money, the prosecutor's office classified the case under Article 209 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, legalization of proceeds obtained by criminal means. The penalty is from 8 to 12 years with confiscation. This is about protecting Yermak and those in power. Telegram channels are now attacking this particular article, claiming that the prosecutor's office classified it as a predicate offense. 209 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, but I'll explain why the investigation specifically chose the issue of legalization. Income received, the amount of funds that came from the laundromat, meaning from money laundering for construction. Sanction. Нашли финансовый поток with confiscation. They can prove the very fact of money laundering even without completing the construction examination. Yermak's defense says no. First, you need to establish the elements of the crime, namely that these houses were in fact built with corrupt money, and based on these then prove that this money was somehow laundered. Nabiu claims that you can take a different approach, and this is fundamentally important because it was the construction examination of the dynasty's properties that someone blocked, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. The prosecutor's office classified the pressure on the experts, which allegedly came from SBU employees. As a result, today in court, Andriy Yermak stated that he doesn't have the money to post bail, and don't think that under Article 209 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine he actually has no money. He has money, but the source of his income is questionable. It's hard to find clean money for a person who is facing up to 12 years in prison. He can't find money for bail, or maybe he can, but it's not clean money. And then that in itself becomes evidence for the prosecution. As a result, tomorrow, May 14, they should finally make a decision about the preventive measure. The prosecution classified it under Article 209 of the Criminal Code for funds obtained illegally. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel. You can do so financially with any donation or paid subscription. The prosecution classified it under Article 209 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, legalization of income obtained by illegal means. The penalty is up to 12 years with confiscation.